The Count's Cursed Bride Part 1. Chapter 1, The Burning and the Rescue. The fog that blanketed the village of Barjov was thicker than usual, coiling low around boots and torches, swallowing the screams before they could echo. In the center of the square, a wooden post stood crooked, splattered with wax and soot, used too often, feared too little. And tied to it was Freya Varga, daughter of the baker, wrists bound with rough rope, face cut by smoke and panic. Her crime? Mercy. She had saved a boy, 8 years old, from a mob that claimed he was possessed. She'd stood in front of him, shielded him with her body, and shouted them down. And for that, the boy had been dragged home, and Freya had been condemned. Witch, someone muttered. Demon-hearted. She healed him too fast. No wound heals in a day. She spoke in tongues when the fever broke. The crowd grew louder. Pitchforks trembled in trembling hands. Salt was flung. A priest stood nearby, his shaking voice muttering holy verses more out of fear than faith. And the torch, lit, was raised. Freya's face was streaked with ash and defiance. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. But her heart pounded in her chest like a war drum. The torchbearer stepped forward. Then, a sharp wind. A scream. A horse's cry. From the fog emerged a black stallion, hooves slamming into the earth like thunder. Atop it, a rider dressed in a long coat of sable wool, his face half shrouded by a velvet mask. The villagers froze. He dismounted with eerie calm. He moved like shadow and command incarnate. Count Louis Voisard. Step away from her, he said, voice quiet, and somehow heard by all. One of the men stepped forward, emboldened by pitchforks and smoke. This is not your business, my lord. Louis turned to him slowly. Everything that happens beneath my sky is my business. He raised one gloved hand. The torch flared, then flickered out. Not a single spark landed on Freya. The villagers backed away as the Count stepped forward, his gaze never leaving Freya's face. There was no recognition in her expression, only disbelief and confusion. He drew a silver dagger and sliced her bonds with surgical precision. She slumped forward into his arms. She will leave with me, he said to the stunned priest. And none of you will follow. No one moved. They didn't dare. Inside his carriage, rumbling away through the forest road, Freya finally spoke. Her voice cracked, but her wool hadn't dimmed. Why would a nobleman save a baker's daughter? Louis Voisard sat across from her, hands clasped, his eyes unreadable. You were brave, he said simply. And you are owed repayment. Repayment? I have a room prepared for you at my estate. It's temporary. Until you are safe. She stared at him in the flickering lantern light. And if I don't want to go? You'll be returned to the village, he said coldly. Where the next fire may not miss. He didn't smile. He didn't soften. But something behind his eyes trembled, like someone seeing a ghost. By dawn, the carriage emerged from the fog into a clearing. And there stood Castle Voisard. A towering fortress of spires and stone, windows shuttered with black iron, vines twisting up its sides like frozen flame. It looked like it had been pulled from a forgotten myth, a place no living soul should dwell. Freya stared. Why does it feel like I've seen this before? Louis turned to her. You haven't, he said. Not in this life. Chapter 2, The Count's Bargain. As the iron carriage clattered to a stop beneath Castle Voisard's frostbitten archway, the morning light struggled to penetrate the thick mist curling around its turrets. Massive doors opened with a groaning sound, as if the stone itself resented the sunlight. Servants stood silently in waiting, eyes lowered, hands clasped. All of them wore grey. None of them smiled. Freya stepped out onto the frozen stone steps, her hands wrapped around her elbows, more from uncertainty than cold. The Count did not assist her. He merely gestured. This way. The castle was as grand as it was unsettling. Portraits lined the halls, paintings of past Voisards, all bearing the same pale skin and shadowed expressions. Velvet drapes muffled every sound. Mirrors were rare, and those that remained were cracked or covered. "This place is haunted," Freya muttered under her breath. Louis glanced at her. "It has memory." Memory is not the same as haunting. Their footsteps echoed through a long corridor that split into two wings. She paused before the left, its doors were chained shut. "What's there?" "The north wing," he said flatly. "It is sealed. You are not to enter it." "Because?" He stopped walking. His eyes, cold as river ice, met hers. "Because I said so." That evening, Freya was brought to a crimson-draped drawing room, where a fire flickered low in the hearth. A decanter of dark wine sat between two chairs. Louis waited, reading a book bound in black leather. He gestured for her to sit. She didn't. "I want to know what you expect of me," she said. He looked up. "Calm. Measured. Dangerous. I expect you to remain here. You may walk the halls, eat as you please, read in the library. You are not a prisoner, though you may not leave the grounds." "Then I am a prisoner," she countered. "You are protected." "From what?" He set the book aside. The firelight danced in his eyes, revealing a flicker of something unspoken, old grief, perhaps. Or guilt. "You did something brave," he said. "Something kind. That should have earned you a reward. Instead, it nearly earned you a grave. I have chosen to correct the scales." Freya narrowed her eyes. "No one risks the wrath of an entire village for justice alone." Louis stood slowly, his frame elegant but imposing. "I've made my offer. You are under my protection. That is the bargain. Take it, or return to the fire." Later, alone in the castle's cavernous kitchen, Freya found a loaf of bread, fresh. The first taste of home she'd had in days. As she chewed, she remembered the last moments in her father's bakery. Her hands covered in flour. Her mother humming. The village still full of smiles. How had she gone from kneading dough to bargaining with a stranger in a haunted palace? That night, as snow began to fall, Freya stood at her window, overlooking the frozen forest beyond the castle walls. Moonlight bathed the land in pale silver. She pressed her palm against the glass. Behind her, in the hall, a shadow passed, but when she turned, nothing was there. Only the echo of the Count's words. "You are not a prisoner. You are protected." Then why did it feel like the cage had simply become prettier? Chapter 3, The Castle of Echoes. Freya awoke to silence. Not the comforting kind. The thick kind, the kind that hums just beneath the ears and makes you feel like you're being watched even when alone. Her chamber was lavish, damask wallpaper, thick velvet curtains, a canopied bed carved with roses. But it felt more like a mausoleum than a bedroom. A tray of breakfast had been left on the side table. She hadn't heard anyone enter. As she stepped into her slippers, a floorboard creaked. "This place remembers every step," she murmured. Freya explored cautiously, walking through the east corridors, where frost curled along the window panes and candelabras flickered without breeze. She passed suits of armor that seemed too perfectly posed, eyes of painted portraits that seemed to follow, and staircases that bent strangely, as if warped by time itself. Occasionally, the walls whispered. Not full voices, but murmurs. Faint and ancient, like threads of conversation unraveling in another room. Freya stopped, pressed her ear to the stone. It spoke only in sighs. She passed a parlor with teacups left mid-sip. A study where a clock had stopped a century ago, its pendulum swinging lazily in the opposite direction. But it was the ballroom that stopped her breath. The chandeliers were crusted with dust and webbing, but the parquet floor gleamed like glass beneath it. A grand piano rested at the edge, keys exposed like teeth. Candles flared the moment she stepped in. And at the far end, a painting. A wedding scene. The bride's back was turned. But even in oils, Freya could see the shape of her body, the posture, the curve of her neck. It was her. Her knees weakened. Later that day, while in the library, she encountered the first servant to speak to her. An elderly woman in mourning black with a milky eye and a cane carved like a serpent. The woman gave a stiff nod. You shouldn't wander. Why? Because the house listens. And sometimes, it answers. Freya straightened. Do you know what happened to the Count's bride? The woman hesitated. Then, no one ever sees her. But the music plays sometimes. Always on rainy nights. That evening, as snow began to melt into rain and clouds blanketed the moon, Freya sat in her chamber writing in the journal she'd found in a drawer. A waltz, slow, sorrowful, rose faintly from the hall below. She opened the door and stepped out, barefoot, heart pounding. The music drifted from the ballroom. No light. No footsteps. No movement. She walked forward anyway, as if pulled by strings. And then the music stopped. The chandelier above her flickered. In the cracked mirror by the door, she saw herself, but not quite. The woman in the glass wore a wedding veil. And whispered, "We are not done." Freya spun. No one. Only the echo of that final note, hanging in the air like a breath held too long. Chapter 4, A Familiar Mirror. It rained through the night. Not a gentle drizzle, but a fierce, relentless storm that clawed at the turrets of Castle Voisard. The windows trembled with every thunderclap. The hearth in Freya's room refused to light, no matter how many times she tried. It was as if the castle itself had gone cold. She wrapped herself in a shawl and lit a single candle, determined to find warmth, or distraction, in the hallways. She passed the library and turned into a corridor she didn't recognize, narrower, lined with gold-framed mirrors covered in linen. But one stood uncovered. At the very end. Its gilded frame was delicate and baroque, carved with roses and thorns, faded with time. Unlike the others, it wasn't warped or veiled. It waited for her. Drawn forward like a moth to flame, Freya stepped closer, the candle in her hand flickering violently as she approached. At first, she saw only herself, her pale face, the firelit curls, the shadow under her eyes from sleeplessness. Then, slowly, the reflection began to change. The shawl disappeared. Her nightdress darkened into white lace, embroidered with centuries-old thread work. A bridal gown. Her curls lifted into an elegant updo, pinned with gold combs. A veil fluttered down over her face. Freya froze. She looked down at herself. She was still in her nightdress. But in the mirror, she was a bride. The reflection smiled. And whispered. Freya didn't hear it with her ears. She heard it behind her ribs. A whisper like breath on the skin. He promised. He always promises. And still, he watches me die. Freya stumbled back, her breath gone, her pulse roaring in her ears. She turned away. And the mirror cracked. A long, deliberate crack that split the glass down the middle, cutting the reflection's bridal face clean in two. The candle dropped from her hand. She gasped once, tried to call for help, but her voice caught in her throat. Her knees buckled. And the last thing she saw was her own reflection, reaching out through the fractured glass. As everything went black. Chapter 5, A Midnight Waltz. Freya awoke in her bed. She didn't remember returning to it. Her head throbbed like she'd walked through fire and shadow. The last image in her mind was that mirror, the bridal version of herself smiling through cracked glass. Beside her on the nightstand sat a sealed envelope, cream parchment and pressed with the Voisard family crest, a raven entwined with a rose. Inside, the message read, "You are requested for supper. Midnight. The Blue Hall. LV." Her hands trembled. It was the Count's first written invitation since she'd arrived. Her instincts screamed caution, but her curiosity screamed louder. When she opened her wardrobe, she found a gown waiting. Not one of hers. This one shimmered with sapphire velvet and black lace, the fabric cool to the touch, and clearly made for her, as if it had known her measurements before she ever entered the castle. She hadn't asked for it. No one brought it. Still, something compelled her. Freya dressed. And as she fastened the final button, she swore she saw movement in the full-length mirror. But this time, no reflection smiled back. Only her. Alone. The blue hall was no longer decayed. Tonight, it was aglow. Hundreds of candles floated in chandeliers overhead. Musicians, silent for decades, played an elegant, mournful waltz with silver violins. Petals drifted from nowhere. The entire ballroom shimmered as if trapped in a memory. At the far end, Count Louis Voisard stood. Dressed in obsidian black formal wear, a crimson silk cravat at his throat, and a rose pinned to his chest, black, not red. His hair gleamed under candlelight, and his eyes seemed deeper than they had before. He didn't speak when she entered. He simply extended his hand. She took it. He guided her effortlessly. They swept across the ballroom floor as if gravity had given up its hold on them. Every step was too familiar, every twirl too perfectly timed. Freya's breath came short. I know this dance. The music slowed. The room darkened. And suddenly, it wasn't the blue hall anymore. The candlelight shifted to torchlight. The walls were stone now, older. The chandeliers rusted. Freya glanced down and saw that her dress was no longer blue velvet, but white lace. The bridal gown. And blood was dripping down her side. She looked up. Louis, not as he was now, but younger, desperate, in agony, was holding her. She was dying. He whispered her name. Ilona. Tears streamed down his face. I failed again. She tried to respond, but no sound came. Her lips parted, and the blood spilled faster. Then. Thunder. Screams. A cathedral bell tolling overhead, shattered mid-ring. Freya gasped. The ballroom reappeared. The music ended. Louis still held her, but his grip had tightened. His breathing was uneven. He had seen it too. He let go, suddenly, and stepped back as if burned. I shouldn't have asked you here, he said sharply, voice tight. This was a mistake. What did I see? She asked. But he only turned away. His face was unreadable now. Cold again. Masked. I advise you, he said, to stay away from the mirrors. And from me. Freya left the hall with trembling legs, her pulse thundering behind her eyes. But the worst part was not the vision. Not the blood. Not the ghostly echoes of the past. The worst part was how her body still ached to finish the dance. Even knowing how it ended. Chapter 6, The Bride in the Wall. The next morning, the castle felt different. The halls were colder. The servants spoke less. Even the wind that usually moaned through the turrets had gone silent, as if the entire structure held its breath. Freya wandered the west wing, unable to shake the sensation of being watched, not by eyes, but by memory. Every step felt rehearsed. Every doorway familiar. But from where? She found it while fleeing her own reflection. A glimmer in a hallway mirror caught her eye, not her face this time, but a faint breeze blowing a tapestry behind her. Curious, she turned and approached the faded fabric. It bore the Voisard crest, a raven perched on a rose bush beneath a starless sky. Behind it, a slight depression in the wall. Freya pressed her hand against the stone, and it clicked inward. With a soft groan, a hidden door creaked open. Dust exploded into the air like the exhale of a long-buried secret. She stepped inside with only a candelabra. The room was long, narrow, chapel-like, with stained glass windows coated in centuries of grime. Wooden pews rotted in place. Ivy twisted through cracks in the stone. A low hum filled the air, not quite sound, not quite silence. At the far end, behind a draped curtain, she saw a shape, tall, vertical, human-sized. She approached slowly, pulled back the curtain, and gasped. It wasn't a painting in a frame. It was a mural, a fresco painted directly onto the stone wall. A woman stood in bridal attire, pale hands clasped in front of her, dark curls swept into an updo, wearing a wedding gown of shimmering silver threads. She stared out with haunting eyes, wide, intelligent, and heavy with sorrow. And they were Freya's eyes. Same bone structure. Same mouth. Same posture. The likeness was uncanny. No, impossible. Beneath the mural, carved into the stone like a gravestone, read: Countess Ilona Voisard. Beloved. Lost. Eternal. Freya backed away, one trembling hand over her chest. No, no, that can't be. And yet, her pulse told another truth. It quickened. Not from fear, but from remembrance. She knew that gown. She knew the way the veil draped over the shoulders. She had felt it once, though she never had. Ilona. The name tasted like a memory she hadn't swallowed yet. The mural seemed to whisper as her candle flickered. You came back. Behind her, a floorboard groaned. Freya spun, her heart leaping to her throat. Louis Voisard stood in the doorway. No coat. No cravat. His shirt slightly open, as if he'd come in haste. His face, usually stone, now cracked open with something between grief and awe. You weren't meant to find this, he said quietly. Who is she? Freya whispered. He stepped forward, not answering. You knew I looked like her. You knew and said nothing. I said nothing, he agreed, because I did not want to believe it. Believe what? Louis stared at the mural, and for the first time, he looked broken. That fate has come for me again. Chapter 7, The Count's Confession. They didn't speak for a long time. Freya stood near the mural, chest heaving, hands clenched, heart filled with too many questions and one relentless truth: she had seen this face before. In dreams. In mirrors. In nightmares. Louis stood opposite her, his back straight but his eyes distant, as though watching ghosts parade through the chapel. Start talking, Freya said finally, her voice thin with fury and fear. Very well, Louis replied. But understand, you may wish I hadn't. Louis began to speak. Her name was Ilona. My wife. My ruin. My beginning and end. We were wed in this very castle over 200 years ago, on a night not unlike the one we danced together. I was not a man of sentiment then. Nor of warmth. But Ilona, she was fire itself. She challenged everything. Especially me. He paused, his voice roughening. On our wedding night, a curse was laid upon us. It was not by God's hand, nor the devil's, but something far older. A bargain made by my bloodline generations ago. For power. For land. For immortality. Freya's eyes widened. You're not immortal? No. But cursed? Yes. The price of my ancestors' greed was a legacy of loss. Every Voisard heir would find their fated bride, and lose her. Violently. Tragically. Repeatedly. Ilona was the first. And the worst. Because I loved her. Desperately. He stepped closer, his voice softening. After Ilona died, I thought the curse ended. But a year later, I saw her again, in another woman's face. Not a twin. Not an illusion. Ilona. Reborn. She never remembered me. Not fully. But each life, we were drawn together. Always. And always, before I could save her, she would die. Different every time. Fire. Drowning. Sickness. Accident. Murder. Freya staggered back, gripping the edge of a pew. And now I'm her again. Louis nodded once. Slowly. Yes. You knew the moment you saw me in the village. Not at first. But when you spoke, when you defended that child, Ilona lived in your voice again. I would have known it anywhere. Freya swallowed. And still, you brought me here. Because this time, he said, stepping closer, voice tight with hope and torment, I thought, perhaps, if I changed the story, the ending would change, too. Freya turned away, staring back at the mural of her former self. What if I don't want to be her, she whispered. What if I want to be Freya? Louis didn't answer. But the silence told her everything. She moved past him, brushing his arm as she walked. The contact burned, not with heat, but with the weight of fate. A memory under her skin. A name carved on her soul. At the door, she paused. If I die again, it will be on my terms. Louis met her gaze, and this time, something cracked in his perfect composure. Then I will protect your terms with everything I have left. Freya returned to her chambers in silence. She didn't light the hearth. She didn't change from the velvet gown. She simply sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the storm beyond the window. And whispered the name aloud, once, like a spell, or a warning. Ilona. Chapter 8, The Marchioness Arrives. The arrival began with thunder, but not from the sky. It came from the castle gates. Hooves. Dozens. Coats flapping. Servants murmuring. And then a name passed from mouth to mouth like a curse. She's here. From the window of her chamber, Freya watched the sleek black carriage pull through the iron gates. The Voisard crest was absent, replaced by a silver serpent wrapped around a lily. A door opened. And out stepped a vision in violet. Marchioness Eliza de Lequeux. Eliza was tall, statuesque, and dressed in layers of silk that shimmered like venom. Her golden hair was swept into a twist so precise it looked carved. Her gloved fingers tapped the silver handle of her parasol with the rhythm of someone used to being obeyed. She didn't wait to be announced. She swept through the front doors with all the poise of a queen and the precision of a sword. Freya turned from the window with a tightening in her chest. She didn't know Eliza yet. But she already hated her footsteps. Louis met Eliza in the drawing room. He didn't rise from his chair. She didn't curtsy. How charming, she said in French. Still keeping to your shadows, Louis? And you're still trying to chase yours away with perfume, he answered dryly. She smiled. Touché. There was no warmth in their greeting. Only elegance, like two wolves in silk. Why are you here, Eliza? Because I heard whispers. Of course. One doesn't ignore rumors about you, darling. Rumors? That you've taken in a girl. She paused. A girl with a striking resemblance to someone we both buried. Their conversation was interrupted by footsteps. Freya entered, hesitant but proud, dressed simply in slate grey. Eliza turned, and the moment their eyes met, the air shifted. Eliza's pupils narrowed like a cat's. Ah, she breathed. You must be the guest. Freya nodded. Freya Varga. Eliza's lips curled. How quaint. Louis stood. Freya is under my protection. Yes, I see. And how quickly you offer it to the new ones. Her eyes never left Freya. Not fully. Like a hawk watching something fragile and possibly delicious. You look so much like her, Eliza whispered. It's uncanny. Like who? Freya asked, though she already knew. Oh, you'll find out. That evening, Eliza settled into her old guest quarters, demanding new curtains, fresh flowers, and a full-length mirror brought in. She walked the halls as if they still belonged to her. She passed servants and asked too many questions. She complimented Freya's dress with barbed sweetness. and she wandered just close enough to the north wing to be noticed. Freya caught her once, lingering near the chained doors. "What are you hoping to find?" she asked. Eliza smiled without turning around. "What all women hope to find. A mistake I can exploit." Late that night, Freya couldn't sleep. In the corridor outside her chamber, she heard faint footsteps, measured, careful, echoing like a whispered threat. She stepped out quietly, but saw no one. Only a single lily petal on the floor, crushed under a heel. Chapter 9: Eliza's Jealous Game. It started at breakfast. Eliza arrived late, floating into the dining room like a theatrical mist. Her gown was deep burgundy satin, clinging to her like blood-made silk. She offered Louis a kiss on each cheek, uninvited but expertly timed. Freya sat opposite, silent and still in her grey wool. "Oh dear," Eliza said sweetly, looking Freya over. "You've such delicate features. They remind me of someone, but I can't imagine who." Louis's fork clinked hard against his plate. Eliza smiled. Freya remained calm, though her spine stiffened. "I suppose you're finding your place here?" Eliza asked. "As a guest?" "As a woman with purpose," Freya replied. Eliza tilted her head, amused. "Let's hope it's not the same purpose as the last one." Later that day, Eliza insisted on a private violin recital in the gallery, one of Louis's old favorites, a Hungarian sonata once played by Ilona herself. She asked Louis to sit beside her. He refused. She asked him to walk the gardens with her. He declined again. "You used to melt like candle wax under this music," she pouted. "I no longer burn for things that don't keep me warm," he replied coolly. Eliza's eyes narrowed, and though she smiled, something inside her cracked. She turned her attention to Freya instead. And that was when the real game began. Every day that followed, Eliza left little verbal needles hidden in roses. "That dress is lovely, though velvet tends to cling to baby fat, doesn't it? You remind me so much of Ilona. Only Ilona had a bit more Polish. Louis must find you refreshing, like a village girl pretending to be a duchess." Freya responded with silence, or tight smiles. But the poison worked its way into her skin nonetheless. She began to doubt the way she walked, the way she held her fork, even the pitch of her laughter. Every shadow whispered, "She's replacing you." Again. One night, Freya woke from a restless sleep and left her room to clear her mind. She passed the library and heard Eliza's voice inside. "You miss me," the Marchioness purred. Freya paused. "I know your darkness, Louis. I know what you are beneath the gentleman. This girl. She doesn't. She'll run, like they all do." But I stayed. Silence. Then Louis's voice, quiet, clipped. "You stayed because you loved winning. Not me." Freya leaned against the wall, her chest rising with shallow breath. "You think she'll save you?" Eliza snapped. "You'll curse her, like all the rest." "Then why are you here?" he asked softly. "Because you're still mine," she said, and Freya heard the sound of lips pressing, desperate, entitled. And then, Louis pulling away. "No," he said. "Never again." 2 days later, rumors began drifting up from the village below. Eliza had gone to the market, spoken to several priests, whispered in taverns about a girl with a cursed face living in the castle. A girl who looked like the dead. A girl whose presence invited doom. Freya heard it from one of the younger servants. "The Marchioness said it's not natural," the girl whispered. "Said you wear another woman's skin." That night, Freya stood before her mirror. For the first time, she could no longer tell if the face staring back was hers, or Ilona's. Behind her in the glass, the door creaked open. Eliza's reflection stood in the threshold. "You don't belong here, dear. And you won't last. I've seen stronger women fall." Freya turned to face her fully. Then you've never seen a woman who remembers how she died. Chapter 10, Visions of Fire. The castle walls breathed at night. Freya had come to learn this, the way the old stone sighed with age, how floorboards creaked in rhythm with her heartbeat, how the chandeliers rattled without breeze. That night, sleep eluded her entirely. Eliza's venom still lingered behind her ears. Whispers from the villagers filtered up from the valley like smoke. Louis had grown distant again, as if her very presence now pained him. And the mirror by her wardrobe had begun weeping condensation, as if something inside were warmer than the room itself. She finally lay down, exhaustion overcoming fear. But as her eyes drifted closed, the fire returned. She stood in the center of a stone courtyard. It was night, but the fire lit up everything, red-orange flames licking the sky, crackling wood, the hiss of hot air rising like screams from the earth itself. She was barefoot, in a white shift, her hair undone and wild around her shoulders. Her hands were tied to the stake. The crowd watched in silence, villagers with familiar faces. Faces she knew. Faces from the present. The baker's wife. The stable boy. Even the priest who had tried to exorcise her. All of them were there, their eyes blank, their mouths shut. Louis stood in the back, reaching for her, held back by chains of smoke and guilt. "Ilona," he called. "I'm sorry. I came too late." "You promised," she cried, tears searing her cheeks before the flames could. "You swore you'd save me." But his face twisted in helpless agony. And the torch was dropped. Freya screamed. But the flames that licked her were not only heat, they were memory. She felt every crackle in her ribs, every scream ricochet through her past selves. She didn't just feel pain. She felt betrayal. The fire devoured her. She jolted upright in bed, soaked in sweat. The sheets clung to her like wet bandages. Her hands trembled. But the smell of smoke still hung in the air. On instinct, she looked down at her wrists. Blisters. Red, raw marks circled her skin, where the dream ropes had held her. She gasped. It wasn't just a dream. At dawn, she stormed into the conservatory where Louis stood, hands clasped behind his back, watching the light stretch across the snow-dusted hedges. He turned, his expression unreadable, until he saw her wrists. His face went white. "You're remembering faster than any life before," he whispered. "I felt it, Louis. I burned. Because the past is reclaiming you." "Why?" Her voice cracked. "Why does it hurt more this time?" Louis stepped closer, his voice soft and hoarse. "Because this is the first time you're remembering not just how you died, but who killed you." Freya stepped back, cold rippling through her spine. They weren't strangers. The people who burned Ilona. Louis nodded, slow, ashamed. They were the ones she trusted most. She couldn't speak. The silence between them was filled with ghosts. That night, Freya didn't light any candles. She sat in the dark, holding her burned wrist, staring at the mirror. And whispered, "I will not die the same way twice." Chapter 11, The Witch in the Library. The nightmares didn't return that night. But neither did sleep. Freya sat in bed as the hours passed, watching shadows crawl across the walls like ink in water. She wrapped her burned wrists in linen and waited for dawn, but dawn came slow in Castle Voisard, as if even the sun feared to breach its windows. The air carried a scent she couldn't place. Ash and lavender? A memory brushed against her thoughts like fingertips across her skin. "There's something I haven't found yet," she whispered. The castle was watching her. That much she knew now. But tonight, she would watch it back. The Voisard library was 3 stories high. A cathedral of knowledge, stretching beyond comprehension. Shelves kissed the vaulted ceiling. Ladders on rails lined the walls like sentinels. Dozens of locked cabinets, hundreds of ancient tomes. She wandered the aisles with only a single candle in hand, letting instinct guide her feet. A breeze shifted one of the ladders. A single book fell. It landed at her feet. Not loudly, but deliberately. The book was bound in cracked black leather, the cover bare, no name, no markings. Only a sigil on the spine, a crescent moon pierced by a needle. Freya opened it slowly. The pages inside were written in a looping, slanted hand, some in Latin, others in Hungarian. Symbols she didn't understand. Diagrams of the body and the soul. Notations of phases of the moon. Instructions for rituals. She turned a page, and froze. There, pressed between two yellow cheeks, was a dried black rose. Beneath it, a name was written in bold ink. Ilona Voisard. Freya dropped to her knees, the candle flickering widely beside her. She turned page after page, faster now. Spells. Bindings. Protection rites. There was one entry, boxed in charcoal, written with visible urgency. The cycle must break. If she returns, and the curse still clings, this is the way. Beneath it, a ritual. A blood binding. A spell so ancient it had no name. One side of the spell required the blood of the cursed bride. The other, the blood of the man who watched her die. A footnote below the spell. One will walk free. One will not. Freya sat back on her heels. It was clear. This wasn't just a story of love and loss. It was a cycle of sacrifice. A curse so deep it had rooted itself into the very walls of the castle. Into her blood. If she broke it, either she or Louis would have to pay the price. And she didn't yet know who she was more willing to lose. As she stood, tucking the book beneath her cloak, she heard footsteps. Not loud. Not hurried. Measured. She turned. Louis stood at the archway. No coat. No gloves. Just shadow and silence. You found it, he said. Freya nodded. She was more than a bride. She was a witch. She was everything. He stepped forward, staring down at the grimoire in her hands. Are you going to use it? He asked. Freya didn't answer. Not yet. She simply looked at him, really looked, and whispered. Would you die for me? His silence said more than any vow.
Across every empire, every forgotten age, stories still whisper. If this tale stirred your spirit, leave a like to honor the echoes of the past. Share your thoughts in the comments. Every voice weaves a new legend into the sands of time. And subscribe to our YouTube channel Historical Fantasy Stories, where myths walk beside history, and every discovery changes the world. The next forgotten legend is waiting to be found.